Hello and welcome to this webinar event, a part of the Veeam TrailBlazer Talk series. This event is where you'll learn about drivers and challenges of the future IT. We'll talk about cloud-based production scenarios, personas, and strategies. This is going to be a great presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about today's event. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. As always, at Actual Tech Media, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions there in the questions pane. We even have a Best Questions prize, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. We also encourage you to check out the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a link to getting started with the Veeam solution. So make sure that you check that out. Veeam has just tons of resources over there on their website about today's topic, improving your data protection, disaster recovery, ransomware, all sorts of excellent resources. So make sure that you check that out. And then also at the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms can be found right there in the Handouts tab. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our Best Question prize for an additional gift card, an Amazon $50 gift card. Of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into that prize drawing and also meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that, it's now time to bring in today's expert presenter. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Dave Russell, Vice President of Enterprise Strategy at Veeam. Dave, it's great to have you on. Let's
Yeah,
kick it
good to
off.
be back with you, David. Good to see you.
You as well. Here we go.
All right. So I am very, very happy to share with you just a portion, some of the highlights of some research that we concluded. I'll take you through what that research looked like, share with you some of the highlights, as well as the link for a full report that my colleagues and I recently did. It's around different cloud-based production scenarios, personas, strategies, things that you can consider in your current and upcoming. And upcoming, I mean 2022 is somewhat shockingly kind of around the corner. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about this cloud protection trends research that we've got here. And so this actually represents a pretty large survey. It's from 14 countries, over 1,500 different respondents. You can see it was roughly 70% enterprise, meaning 1,000 employees and above. Veeam we call the middle tier commercial, or 30%, roughly a little less than a third, came from the commercial segment. Workload types that we're going to talk through today: Office 365, infrastructure as a service for production use cases, cloud-hosted databases, and containers. Now, the ring that you see over on the right-hand side, that is actually the persona or the type of administrator in kind of the, I'll call it lightish, greenish color here, kind of from 12 o'clock to 7 o'clock. That was the infrastructure as a service admin, of which represented 61% of the respondents. The platform as a service, software as a service in that lighter green, let's call it roughly 7 o'clock to almost 10 o'clock, was those administrators. And then the backup admins at 21%, roughly 10 o'clock over until noon. So we've got a number of different workloads. We've got a number of different people, and we have a number of different company sizes as well as geographies that we surveyed. So let's dive in first to Office 365. With the way that I'll flow through this is I picked out 3 of my favorite slides on each one of these workloads. You can see here in the kind of orange at the bottom, the full report is available at that short URL, ve.am/CPT21 Cloud Protection Trends 21 report. We're also going to make that report available to you at the conclusion of the webinar if you've signed up for this. So now, Let's look at Office 365. Who actually manages the backup, the data protection associated with this? On the left-hand side, you can see what the backup administrators had to say. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what the SaaS, software as a service administrators had to say. Pretty even. That's the first thing I want to point out. I thought this was good news that things are looking pretty similar between the two constituents. Now, the same individuals, the team that manages O365, that's the largest response by far. Both the backup admins and the SaaS administrators believe that that's the case. Now, in between, in the middle, the same individuals who manage on-premises backup, which is pretty interesting. So it's not just a case of only one group ever manages to protect or back up O365. We might actually have a couple of different constituencies. And then on the right-hand side, very much the minority is a different individual than the dedicated backup team might be involved. So why do you back up? First thing I want to really highlight is look at the number of different responses. So we're protecting Office 365 for a variety of reasons. And what this is basically telling us is there's more than a couple of things that can go wrong, unfortunately, in the environment. So whether that's one of the, I almost call it a two-way tie, at least in terms of the backup administrators and SaaS administrators. Just barely number one by a nose is accidental deletion of data. That's actually remains the top concern on-prem as well, but really right behind. You almost cannot have a conversation in today's age without having a cyber security discussion. And look how those two really percolate to the top. Somewhat related to cyber, we've got a malicious user or internal threat. Actually, the SaaS administrators are a little more worried about that. And then you can see whether it's compliance or better restore capabilities, meaning more granularity, et cetera. But a lot of things are driving us to be interested in protecting O365. Now, how are we protecting that? Well, pretty good sample size here of almost 1,000 responses. Little variance that we've seen year over year. So here we're introducing a different kind of data point where we had the same question what we asked in the very beginning of 2020, and then now a little over halfway through 2021, we started collecting our data this year. On the left-hand side, we only use the built-in Office 365 capabilities. That is pretty much akin to the recycle bin. That dropped dramatically from 2/3 to less than half. What we see in the middle, we use a third-party backup or service for O365. That jumped up quite a bit from 27% to 45%. We're seeing more and more organizations believe that they need to take dedicated action. Interesting one on the right, we don't actively back up O365. That rose actually, but we have to put that rise in context, meaning what we saw in that same time frame, roughly a year and a half, beginning of 2020 to kind of the August timeframe of 2021, is a number of deployments of O365 just absolutely skyrocketed. So that actually is probably a little flatter than that may look, meaning going from 4 to 8%. So now I'm going to switch gears. We're going to go into our next topic, fourth one. We're going to look at infrastructure as a service from a production perspective. So here's an interesting one, sort of the good and the bad associated with the cloud. On the one hand, we're going to go through what are the benefits, and on the other, we're going to go through what actually might be some of the challenges associated with the actual deployment. And I'm still struggling a little on my clicker. Let's see if I can't get it to find it. Or there we go. Thank you so much. That's probably David doing magic in the background. So let's unpack the benefit side. So what we see here is the top reason people liked the cloud, and production was they liked they thought they got better uptime and reliability. Shortly behind that, they liked the elasticity. We've heard about that forever with the cloud, the ability to scale or to elastically expand resources. Then you can see some notions around remote access or offering additional services, certainly financially, reduce the CapEx, hardware, software. And then you can see we kind of trail into single digits from there. What's interesting is you look at the challenges on the right-hand side. Connectivity and performance issues, networking, in other words, was the top challenge, just barely. Almost tied for that, though, was security concerns. I feel like almost since the beginning of the conversation with cloud, security has always been a top concern, and that even predates a lot of the more recent cyber concerns that we've had. Interestingly, though, look in the middle there, 27 and 22%. Some of the challenges with leveraging public cloud have been increased prolonged service outage and increased data loss. So on the one hand, we have people saying the benefit is I have better uptime and more reliability, and that actually was the number one benefit. But over on the challenge side, we've got 22 and 27% voting for, well, we had an outage and we had data loss. So the experience that an organization has or that business unit may have in the cloud can vary. Now, when it comes to backing up the infrastructure as a service platform, we're asking the specific question here in white, where for cloud data that you're retaining for a year or longer, where do you store that backup data? Now, both the infrastructure as a service admins, the backup admins on the right bars, they largely agree, and the predominant response is we take cloud-based storage within the same exact cloud provider. Now, there's certainly economies of scale. There's certainly economic advantage to doing that. However, some organizations, they actually worry about that. That's now the second to the left grouping, where they would prefer to use cloud-based storage, but a different provider, so that they don't necessarily expose themselves to the same potential kind of outages in that cloud. A minority response, but 20% of the IaaS admins, 11% of the backup admins saying they're going to store production IaaS cloud data in an alternate cloud platform. Then what's very interesting is if you look at on-prem, we do see organizations pull data back on-prem. And what we see here is IaaS say, 14%, we're going to bring it back on-prem to disk. Almost a quarter of the backup admins say that that's what they're doing. Tape, one of those seemingly much maligned type of technologies, but in the cloud, still very relevant. We still see organizations utilizing tape, not just the hyperscalers, but in this case, 17% of both the infrastructure as a service admins and the backup admins say they're bringing their cloud production data back on-prem and they're writing it to physical tape devices. Now let's take a look at platform as a service. And if you've been following the cloud for some time, I think it's fair to say what PaaS is kind of morphed. Today, it's largely considered cloud-hosted databases. So double-clicking on that. If you're running first in Amazon, and I'll do the next one, we'll look at Azure. So on the left-hand side, if you run your databases in an Amazon cloud, tell us a little bit about that. The highest response at 45% was, we run our databases within VMs hosted on Amazon. Almost a third say, yes, we run Amazon RDS-based databases. And then you can see no, and then some caveat. No, but we're planning or we're testing currently use of Amazon RDS to use within 12 months. 12% say no, we're interested in Amazon RDS at some point. And then 7% say, they're really not interested in either. But a full 30% are saying that they have some intention, they have some interest in running databases in Amazon. Now, if we look over on the right-hand side, which database platforms are you running VMs hosted in Amazon? Far and away, Microsoft SQL Server. 75% of the respondents say that they're running SQL Server. Somewhat surprising, Oracle comes in at just over half. And then MySQL and MariaDB and a small amount of PostgreSQL. Oftentimes it's popular opinion, popular thought that it's going to be some of the newer platforms like MySQL or Mariah, or even Postgres for that matter. A lot of people would probably be surprised at just how high that Oracle number is. Let's look at the same kinds of things this time in Microsoft Azure. Left-hand side, 42% says, yes, we are running databases within VMs hosted on Azure. 37% said we are running Azure SQL databases. Then you can see if we aggregate that, 28% say, no, we're not yet, or we're planning testing right now within a year, or we're interested in Azure SQL, and only 6% reply back, no, not interested in really either. But now on the right-hand side, slightly different breakdown, a little bit higher, maybe no surprise since it's Microsoft Cloud and a Microsoft application, but a little bit higher than what we saw on Amazon for Microsoft SQL Server. Slightly lower for Oracle, a little higher for MySQL, roughly same for MariaDB, and a little lower for PostgreSQL. By far and away, though, SQL Server is what we're seeing. And again, I would just comment, probably surprising to many just how high that Oracle number actually is. So now how is this getting protected? So if you stated that your organization is currently using or testing either Amazon RDS or Azure SQL in some way, how are you backing that up? So we had a screener. If you're not doing this or not interested in this, you said that it's not on your horizon. We filter that out. We didn't ask those people this question. 40% said our cloud-hosted databases are natively durable, so we don't need to back them up. They may be in for a surprise depending on what your full or complete definition of native durability actually equates to. Really a two-way tie here. Number 2 and number 3 response. Our cloud-hosted databases do not have data that needs to be backed up. Perhaps they're really more of a test dev environment than a production environment. And then the next response also tied at 22%. We do not currently back up our cloud-hosted databases, but we're looking for a solution. And 15% said we back up cloud-hosted databases using a third-party tool. I will tell you this trend, and it's going to be interesting to watch over time, but we saw this play out in very similar fashion for Office 365, a SaaS-based solution. Interesting, though, that 37% have either a third-party tool or are looking for a solution. So next year, it'll be curious to see how that actually pans out. Let's now look at our fourth workload around containers. This one might surprise you a little bit, but just asking a simple question, what stage is your organization in terms of implementing its container strategy? If you take out the I don't know at 2%, 98% are at some point on this continuum. And if you just quickly look around the dial, then you'll see that we really do have a pretty good dispersion. So 16%, if I go counterclockwise, we have no real interest in containers at this time. 21% said we do not have a timeline for containers, but we're interested in the future. 18% said we intend to use containers in production in the next year. Now it starts to get a little more interesting, perhaps. 16%, we are not yet in production, but we're actively testing containers for production. But note that the highest actual single response is we are already using containers in production. So I would actually be very curious to keep an eye on this result year over year as well. So far, what we've seen is that rise of interest in containers is peaking very, very rapidly, but deployment and production is happening faster than many organizations self-reported just a little bit prior, a year prior, for example. So containers are something that are actively happening here. We've got about 43% saying they're in production or planning to be in production soon. If you add on that 18%, you're up to 61% that believe they will be in production within a year or less. So now looking specifically at Kubernetes in a containerized environment, what platforms did you or will you implement Kubernetes on? And we just said, just choose two, because we didn't want someone to say, I might be interested in everything. That might kind of artificially skew the results. So here, almost 1,000 respondents chose, and you can see it's kind of interesting. It didn't follow the market share of the hyperscalers, meaning it's actually by a few percentage points. Microsoft Azure rose to the top, Azure Cloud at 41%. Then number two, and a close number two, Amazon Cloud at 38 there. A little bit of a drop off, but number three in market from a hyperscaler perspective, and number three on this list is Google Cloud. VMware on-premises at nearly a quarter. Kind of interesting to see that. Still overweighted towards the cloud platforms by far, but you can see VMware on-prem, and then you can see Red Hat and OpenShift on-prem, about 50% less than VMware on-prem. And then we've got a few I don't know, or I'll be running some other container framework, some other cloud service. But by and large, organizations, they're looking at one of the hyperscalers, or they're looking at VMware, Red Hat, OpenShift to be on-prem, to be able to run their Kubernetes solution on. Now, we always end each section, each of these 4 workloads with the backup question. How are you backing up data within your containers? And I appreciate, pretty busy slide. This is probably the most data dense slide that we've shown. So I'll just take a little bit of time to unpack this. We'll go left to right. And as we do, notice that we've got 3 bars. That just represents 3 different groups that we asked, 3 different types of constituencies. On the left-hand side, we asked the infrastructure as a service admins. In the middle, kind of the darker bar, we asked the backup administrators. And then on the right-hand side, the lightish, greenish, yellow bar, we asked the software as a service, platform as a service administrators. So with those 3 constituencies in mind, the left-hand side, for the response, our containerized applications do not have data that need to be backed up. The interesting thing is, notice how the different groups have a different opinion of that. In this case, their opinion is related to whether or not the containerized apps need to be backed up or have important enough data to persist. Notice that the backup admin's kind of in the middle, pretty closely aligned to the IaaS admin, but the software as a service, backup as our platform as a service administrators are having a very different view than the backup or infrastructure as a service admins. Now, second, from the left, the response question was, or answer rather, our container architecture is natively durable, so we do not back it up. A little bit of variation in here. I'm a little surprised that the backup admins in the middle there at 25% believe that a container architecture is natively durable. That probably we should expect to change over time. Now in the middle, our containerized application stateful data is contained separately and backed up there, meaning most likely, as an example, on a storage array, backed up from that storage array. Here you can see this is the top response of any of the different selections that we're capable of answering towards, and it's the SaaS and PaaS admin that nearly half of them, or approaching half, believe that they're going to take the stateful data and back that up outside of the platform itself and back that up on probably something like a storage array. Pretty equal then in terms of at 35%, 33%, the IaaS admins, the backup admins, believing that they'll back up off platform. And then we do not currently back up data from our containers, but we're looking at a solution. Probably no surprise, it's the backup admins in the middle, leading the charge on that, with the IaaS and SaaS admins on either side, pretty much a much smaller percentage point. And then, very interestingly, on the lower right-hand side, we back up our container data using a third-party tool. I thought it was fascinating that the highest response there was actually the SaaS and PaaS admins, not the backup administrators. But maybe what we're seeing here is the backup administrators, if history repeats itself, they're used to getting involved a little later in once a technology's been deployed. If you think back in kind of the 2007 to 2009 timeframe, back when I was an industry analyst, I would take a call and the backup team, the backup admin would say, I came to work Monday and I got surprised. I was told, hey, what are we going to do to protect these 300 production VMs? I didn't even know we had 300 production VMs. This could be history repeating itself from a container perspective as well, but that's probably why you see the previous side there off to the left, 14% of the backup admins say that they're looking for a solution. In aggregate, though, 9% of the IaaS admins, 21% of the backup admins, and 20% of the SaaS PaaS admins either have a solution or are looking for a solution. Given how nascent containers are, that aggregated percentage strikes me actually as pretty high. So with that, I do want to just offer out the URL to this full cloud protection trends report. This was something we were very excited to do. We've been actually at Veeam now. We have concluded in the last 15 months 4 of the industry's ever largest 6 research surveys. So since anything that we've ever known in our space of backup and availability, that we've got 4 of the top 6 that have actually ever been published. This one's specific to cloud protection trends. Encourage you to check all of that out. And I want to thank you.
All right. Awesome presentation, Dave. Thank you so much. We've got a lot of great questions coming in. Did you want to review any of those questions?
Yeah, so I see a couple. I just clicked up the Q&A panel now. Katrina asked a question. What happens if you upgrade a container and the Veeam database is in another version? So I could be misunderstanding the question, but if that is meaning that if Veeam's catalog SQL Server happens to be in a containerized app and you do an upgrade, that actually should work fine. Just resynchronize a connection to Veeam, the Veeam Backup and Replication or VBR console, and that server should pick up and notice that DB fine. But if I didn't correctly, or if I answered a different question, feel free to shoot in a clarification. I'll try to get to that. Okay, well, these are always interesting competition types of questions. So how is Veeam recovery time objective from backup different than or faster than, say, another provider such as the one that recently was acquired by Hewlett Packard Enterprise? So with Veeam, we actually have kind of a 4-in-1 data capture engine of backup software, server-based replication, storage array integration, and now support for continuous data protection through the VMware VAO APIs. With that continuous data protection, we can get into very similar recovery point objectives as compared to something like Azure. A very different cost structure, meaning even Veeam with our orchestration engine, the Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator, comes in at typically a lower price point than does that other solution. Todd asked the question, any data on where backups are being restored, AWS to Azure or AWS to on-prem? So a little bit of a tease, but there we do have in the full report, Todd, some data on that. You give me a good idea, though. In fact, so I don't forget, this is how I remember things now in the pandemic. I am going to take a picture of that question and get with my colleagues. And next time we issue the survey, might see if we can't sneak in a question about where you're restoring to. We asked a question around repatriation, didn't ask specifically on where restoring those. So thank you, Todd. Awesome. So with that, I think we've got most of the main ones. Oh, I'm sorry. I see something here from Matt as I scroll down. Matt, Has your infrastructure been targeted by ransomware attackers? If so, how have you successfully defended your infrastructure against those attacks? Boy, well, there's a lot of great material that we could talk through on that, Matt. And I like to talk about what I call a triple play immutability response, at least from a Veeam perspective. We can write data initially to something like our hardened Linux repository, so no special hardware is required. We can do some special Linux capabilities to ensure that even if someone has root level access, they must have actual physical keyboard access into the server to be able to disable any of the safeguards. But your first level backup would be immutable. From there, your secondary copy could be sent to another immutable device, such as S3, using S3 lock. And then we also have that second level copy could be object storage using locking mechanism for immutability again. And then mentioned tape earlier, but last but not least, your third level of immutability could be ejected tape. I will tell you, in my own home lab, I have Veeam run nightly, and I have external SSD drives connected via USB-C, and I tell Veeam to eject them. So they're physically attached, but as far as, in my case, Windows, as far as the volume manager is concerned, they're not visible. So that once I take the backup, it's ejected. It can't be compromised. Now, it does mean I have to go in and physically replug that back in, but during the time that I'm sleeping, I like to make sure that we do have an air gap situation, even in the lab situation. And let's see. Great. Thank you, Deepak. Appreciate the comment there. Matt asked a question, has anyone developed a ransomware playbook? A quick commercial for you. If you look at white papers on the Veeam site under resources, we actually have two that we've recently published. My colleague Jeff Reichart and Chris Hoff and myself, we published a shorter one around essentially 7 considerations that we thought would be good as you consider a ransomware remediation playbook. And then if you really kind of want to go down the rabbit hole, my colleagues, Edwin Weidema and Rick Vanover, I forget what it actually came out to once it got published, but I want to say it's like a 45, 48-page paper, not just on Veeam, but security port hardening, aspect of, least privilege. So I've got a few are higher level and then lower level resources for you. Oh, thank you, Bill, for a guitar question. What's the guitar second from the right? If I switch it around, that's probably the EVH Charvel Wolfgang, and the Wolfgang's next to it on the other side. But yep, Charvel. And then maybe time for one more, and I'll turn it back over to you, David. From Steve, what is the percentage of people backing up their old 365 data to on-prem rather than to a public cloud? I don't know the exact percentage. We've actually started to ask this question in a couple of other surveys, some VMUG environments, but a couple of examples. We are seeing a rise in people want to bring that data back, meaning bring it to their own on-premise capability. Because if you think about it, O365 arguably is the only SaaS-based application you can really go do something with that data, meaning you've got Outlook, you've got Exchange, and you've got SharePoint, Teams, etc. So if you think about like Salesforce data, forensically, surgically, you could go and at end of quarter, if Salesforce were to go down or if a developer were to make a mistake, drop a table, you could go get that contact information and make that phone call, try to close that sale. But at scale, really very challenging to do. O365 is so different in that you can pull that data and actually consume it yourself, meaning you've got the apps to go read that. So I believe that the number of people pulling data back on-prem rather than a public cloud is going to rise. Thank you for the comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for the comment, Luna. And Bill says, no, the other one. Let's see. Oh, a couple custom shop guitars that a luthier in Tucson, Arizona made. Actually, the 3 at the other end there are all custom. Awesome. David, let me turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation, Dave. This is really cool. I learned a lot about the data protection trends survey or the cloud protection trends survey report. The link is right there for everyone in your audience or in the slides window there. Make sure that you go check it out over at veeam.com. Dave, great presentation. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all the questions interaction.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got a lot of great questions from the audience. Of course, thank you everyone for those. I want to announce the winner now of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Randy Ross from South Dakota. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that prize. And we'll also be reaching out to our best question prize winner as well. Again, don't forget to visit veeam.com and check out the cloud protection Trends 2021 report for yourself. Have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.